So before we begin today, while shofar should be heard in person, not on the internet or on the phone, but there are some people here, and those who can hear it, even if you can't do the mitzvah of shofar, at least you can have the enjoyment of hearing the shofar, which brings you some of that feelings of the month of Elul. So we'll start with the 10 sounds of the shofar, and here goes. Okay. Oh,
wow. You just my brother. My brother blows like him.
Oh, this is the natural blast of the shofar. They say shofar blowing is something you learn to do when you're a child. They say adults who start trying to do it as adults have a hard time. The Alter Rebbe once told somebody why someone asked why he doesn't blow shofar, and he said that you shofar you learn when you're a child, and I was never a child. There's probably some much deeper meaning than that simply. Okay, so we're in chapter 7. We are dealing with some of the most fundamental and basic and truly important themes of faith in God. What does this mean? So we introduced in chapter 7 the idea of Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata. We introduced the ideas of the higher level of unity and the lower level of unity. So in the middle of page 164, we're by the dot, about halfway down, to go and discuss and explain the rest of this chapter, which is a very long chapter. We have to just remind ourselves of two pieces that we did in this chapter. One thing we did was we explained that the reason why Hashem created the world with Adnai, with Malchus, is because he wanted to be a king. He wanted to have the ability to have the role of Malchus, which means a king over something. Hashem didn't want to be a unit alone. He wanted to be a king over something else, meaning, and the only way that can be is if there was a world that can be something other than himself. I'm just muting some of the noise here. Okay.
So we're talking in this parasha about king.
Yes. This week's parasha has the mitzvah Soim Tasam Melech HaMelech, the mitzvah to appoint a king. And by the way, it's a very important to understand the mitzvah because it's referring not just to the role of a king, because the role of the king is to give us faith in Hashem. If you look at the Rebbe's and Chassidus insights into what the job of a king is, the job of the king is to be God's representative on this earth, to create that bond, that relationship between man and God. That's the role of a king. Unfortunately, sometimes the king got to get caught up with petty stuff. They say in a metaphor is, because the question's asked, actually, it's funny, I was just learning the Sikha yesterday. The question is asked when the Jewish people came into Israel and Hashem and Shmuel are giving all the mitzvahs to the land, and the people say, we want a king. And Shmuel gets upset, God gets upset. Why are they getting upset? And Hashem says, okay, here's a king. And the question is, there's a mitzvah in the Torah to establish a king. As a matter of fact, it's a very important mitzvah. Imagine that a person says, I want to put on tefillin. And God says, shame on you. And then what do you mean? There's a mitzvah to have a king. And Hashem gets upset when they want a king. And the answer given, there are two roles that a king could possibly have. One role is the ultimate role of a king, to connect and take the people to a place they couldn't go on their own. To have a vision, to have an ambition, to have an understanding, and to take the people to a place they couldn't reach on their own. To take them to a spiritual, lofty level. And then there's another job of the king, which is all the nations of the world have a king, to avoid people killing each other, to avoid people fighting with each other, to having a society that's healthy. And that could be the role of a king, the role of a court, the role of a government, and that is to hold justice amongst the people. And Hashem was disappointed because if you think about it, let's say a teacher. A role of a teacher altruistically is to be someone to teach the children things they can't learn on their own, or not just children. It can be adults. Teach them things they don't know on their own. Imagine you have a class of people fighting, and the teacher has to spend his whole time keeping the peace. That's not what I need a teacher for. If someone says, hey, we need a teacher here to keep the class from fighting, that's a shame. The people ask for a king for the wrong reasons. The job of the king is to bring you to a lofty level, They want a king to keep the peace. Hashem said yes anyway, because at the end of the day, if the king keeps the peace, maybe the people will grow and have yiras shamayim on their own, have fear of God on their own, and eventually come to properly have the king for his ultimate purpose. That's the mitzvah of a king in the parsha. Here we're talking about, we started off the chapter saying that the king needs to have not just the king over his family or his ministers, over other. And therefore Hashem had created a world where there was other. Now that's being said, we can have a question. The question is, how can we say there's a line in the prophets that says, Ani havaya leishnisi, I am God, I have not changed. And even though there are the simple basic understandings that the philosophers give it, etc., in Chassidus it means I am God and I have not changed at all, meaning there is nothing else besides me. Just like before I created the world, after I created the world, nothing changed. I'm still the only one, I'm still the only existence. And the question is, we just learned that Hashem made another existence. If you want to think about life, what's the biggest changes somebody can have in life? There are two changes that can happen to a person. One is when you get married. When you have another person, why is that? There's an other in your life. Suddenly your life is transformed. It's not about self anymore. Until now, it was all about self. I have to learn, I have to daven, I have to eat, I have to have a job. Suddenly, it's not about me. What's the other want? The other has to learn. The other has to also, it's all about other. The second and maybe bigger change is becoming a parent. Becoming a parent, suddenly, there's a whole nother existence in your life. So the biggest transformation is when there is an other. So Hashem created the world with the purpose to be a king, and he wanted an other. How could we say I didn't change? What do you mean? The biggest change is that now you have someone that you're their God and they worship you and they serve you and they do your mitzvahs. What does it mean, a violation, you see? And this is the question we can have on this chapter over here. But now that we explained one more point in the chapter, we explained the idea of Yechud Ilah and Yechud Data. And once we understand those two things, we understand how Aniyah violation, I am God, I haven't changed, is absolutely accurate and true. You see, according to the regular philosophers and general teachings, what does it mean, Yechud Ilah and Yechud Data? What's the basic understanding in Chassidus at large? When someone says there's a higher level of unity and lower level of unity, the higher level of unity means the world has no significance, it's nothing, it's zero, all there is God. At natural state of bittul, the world is in a natural state of nullification. And the world does not exist for an identity, it has no value, no importance, no significance. It's a non-entity. And all there is God. That's the higher level. Lower level is, no, there is a world. And this world that has a value and has significance yearns and works to be bottled, to be made nullified before God. I see, if I'm in existence, I could say I give myself over to other. Well, I give myself over to God. The lower level of unity is there's me, there's existence, this world, and this world's job is to become batal, to recognize that God is the ultimate. So in other words, that was how everyone saw Yechud Elah, Yechud Atah before this chapter. Comes along the Alter Rebbe, and he tells us something which is unbelievable. He says there's something called Shiluv Adnai B'Havaya and Shiluv Havaya B'Adnai. There's a merge of Adnai, got the name of Adnai, which means the creation of the world as its other, the one of Malchus, and that merges with Hashem, with Havaya, and there's the merging of Havaya in Adnai. In other words, we said that in other Sidurim, we find the four letters of God's name, Yud Kei, Vav Kei, and the four letters of God's name, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud. They find them merge into each other. It would be, let's say, Yud, and then an Aleph, then a Hey, then a Dalet, then a Vav, then a Nun, then a Hey, then a Yud. Sometimes it doesn't start with Yud, it starts with Aleph. The question, who is primary? Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei, or Aleph, Dalet, Nun, Yud? Who is the main thing? Which means, is the main thing here Havaya, the God, and nothing else exists? Or is the main thing here Adnai? There is a world, but it's nullified before God. But let's take it to a new level. You see, we're talking here not that there's two sort of a struggle between two things. Let's take, for example, Yechud Elah. What does Yechud Elah mean over here? It means that Hashem's true identity of nothing else exists in the same space that there exists a world. That means there is a world, there is time, and there is place, and there is an existence. But it is not the existence like we know of. It's that when we say existence, we think of existence as something that's real. There's an existence here. The world doesn't have that existence. Of course there's a world. Of course there's a makom. Of course there's time. To appreciate this is an old joke about the guy discussing the difference between the Jewish hell and the Gentile, the non-Jewish hell. What's the difference? in the Jewish hell, you have to get up at 6 a.m., shovel coal for 6 hours, then you get a 5-minute break, then you shovel coal for 6 hours, etc. And they said on the non-Jewish hell, you get up 6 a.m., you shovel coal for 6 hours, you get a 5-minute break, and then you shovel coal for 6 more hours. They say, what's the difference? They said by the Jewish hell, 6 o'clock's not 6 o'clock, a 5-minute break's not a 5-minute break. 6 means 9, they show up at 9, the break is an hour and a half, So when we say here there's a world, what does it mean there's a world? So let's take, for an example, where do we see Hashem's presence the most in this world? Is in the Beis HaMikdash. And in the Beis HaMikdash itself, in the Holy of Holies. What happened to the Holy of Holies? You had on one hand, the world, place. There was an existence. At the same exact time, there was no place. Which means 6 o'clock wasn't 6 o'clock, 5 minutes wasn't 5 minutes. In other words, the Hashem's presence is not just unlimited where He is. His unlimitedness overwhelms existence. That means Yichud Ilah means not that there's no world. There's no world that exists independent of God, meaning it's overwhelmed completely. There's a world, but it's God's world. It's Havaya overwhelming Adonai. It is a world where time doesn't mean time and space doesn't mean space, but there is time and there is space. That's Yichud Ilah. It's the impossibility of two opposites at the same time, which the human mind can't really grasp. We mentioned this last week. Our mind can't really grasp what that means. It's like someone can't sort of make a picture. It's physically impossible to draw a picture of how the Makkah and Ha'aron wasn't Min HaMidah. It's impossible to draw a picture to show, here is the Aron, here is the rest of the space of the Kodesh HaKodashim, and look here how it takes up the space. Now, either you're drawing the Aron and it takes up space on the picture, or it doesn't. We can't have both at the same time. For God, the Makkah and Ha'aron was not a Makkah and Ha'aron. So what does Yichud Ilah mean? It means the presence of God is so real in this world, overwhelming this world, that His presence is manifest itself to a way that there is no world for itself. Is there a world? Yes, but not the world that we know, not the world that we see, not the world that we understand. But there 100% is a world, and it's not a contradiction. Why? Because Havaya is unleashed. Havaya is unleashed means there is nothing that exists without the breaking of all rules of Havaya. Havaya overwhelms all rules, all existence, and in space and in time, space doesn't mean space, time doesn't mean space. And that's how we explain the perfect merge. It's not two different existences. There is a world, and that world is governed completely by unlimited rule, which means it's bli gvul in gvul, which is the ultimate greatness of God, by the way. The ultimate greatness like the Kodesh HaKodashim. In other words, the ultimate greatness of God is that it's not like He's unlimited and there's something that's limited. That unlimited can be with unlimited. It's like we said a number of times, we gave the example, that the true brilliance is not to have a brilliant scholar talk to a scholar and explain him some brilliance. The brilliance is to talk to a child and explain it to him. If the child understands it, that means you're taking, and you still, and he walks away with the crux, the point, the nucleus of the idea he walks away with. He gets it. Why? Because you could take the most brilliant and bring it down to him. Hashem does one step further. He could take unlimited and merge it into limited. That's what we said in the 2 classes ago. Shiluv Havaya be'Adnai, meaning Havaya is overwhelming Adnai completely. And then you also have the other one, Yichud Tata. Yichud Tata means there is a world. What does it mean there is a world? There's actually a world that you can touch, you can feel. Space is space and time is time. Yeah, 6 o'clock means 6 o'clock. 5 minutes means 5 minutes. But none of that has identity for itself. Like a projector. If you take a projector and you ask someone, is there an image on the wall? Yes, there's an image on the screen. I see a beautiful story. I can watch a video for an hour, a whole story. I can tell you what I saw. It's real. Is there an existence of a picture on the wall? No. I thought you said it is there. It is there, but not for itself. Its whole existence is the light bulb and the image being projected from the projector. It doesn't have an identity for itself. If I would, for 1 second, turn off the projector, it would cease to exist. You know what I mean? It wouldn't last there for half an hour. Some of the old screens actually, the crystals held a picture for a little bit. But on a projector, the projector actually it ceases to exist. Why? Because the identity that's real is only as real as the light coming from its source. And the second that stops, that's the idea of the Havaya engaging Adnai, meaning there is the world, but that world is nothing more, like we said the metaphor many times, of the atoms or the subatomic particles that make up something. That's the real identity. Even though we don't see it, that's the real identity. So this is the second point of the Yichud Tata, means that the entire universe, entire world is real. There is a world, there is a presence, but that is overwhelmed completely by Havaya. There is no separate identity of the world. It is Yichud Tata. There's a world, but that world we know is Shiluv, it's one with Havaya. And here is the cool part. That trick to make the world appear as a separate identity is a much bigger trick than making it exist in the first place. And we spoke about this a lot in the very beginning of this section. The concealment. The concealment is a much bigger trick. It's like almost, you can't conceal yourself with yourself. A child, a lot of times when he plays hide and go seek, he covers his eyes, he thinks that he's hidden. Or the better example on the halachic standard is, there's a halacha that a man must wear a yarmulke. And they're brought down 2 reasons why you have to wear a yarmulke. One reason is because of tznius, because there are certain laws of tznius. Some of them we understand logically. Certain parts of your body, it's not modest to be shown. And some of them we understand because that is what's considered the way Torah sees the proper way to walk in public. And we follow a lot of times what is the accepted modest behavior of a country. Sometimes a country could be immodest. We don't follow that. But the behavior which is of a country which is modest, we follow that. So for example, there were certain countries where the modesty was a woman to wear a sleeve till her wrist. So the proper behavior was to wear it to your wrist. Walking with a shorter sleeve, even though it's past your elbow, was not appropriate. For many, many years, the appropriate behavior was when a person went in public, a man, he put on a hat or a turban or something in public. Only after the 1950s that it stopped. It used to be till the 50s, somebody went outside, they wore a hat in public, a hat. So it became halachically a standard. The Alter Rebbe brings down, yarmulke is worn because it's modesty. It's not modest or it's needs to walk around without your head covered. It's one reason. A second reason is to remind you of Hashem, to remind you of Hashem's presence. So Avram Chaimna, a chassid of the previous Rebbe who goes into these halachas carefully, explains that the law, it depends when you could use your hand. Could you use your hand? Your yarmulke flies off. There's a famous joke about this boy whose yarmulke flew off. So his father says, put your hand on his head. He says, am I my brother's keeper? Okay, whatever. Sorry. But the bottom line is, so the question is, could you use your hand as your yarmulke? So it depends. As far as modesty is concerned, yes. If you cover your head properly with your hand, that is modesty. As far as the obligation of reminding yourself something above you, your hand is still you, it doesn't help. You have to actually take something, a cloth or a yarmulke or something, a hat, to cover your head. You can't cover yourself with yourself. For Hashem to cover himself with himself is a much bigger trick. In other words, Hashem's presence where he's concealed is much more his presence here than if he wasn't concealed. When he's revealed Hashem and you can't see anybody else except Hashem, that's God. But when Hashem lets you exist and at the same time he's concealed and you could seem like your own identity, that is a much greater presence of Hashem. So now let's go back to our statement. We say, Ani Havaya Leishanisi, I am Hashem, I didn't change. Before creation, after creation. Now that we know, of course in Yehuda Ilah, we know nothing changed by Hashem. But even Yehuda Tata, now that we understand the idea of Shiluv, that the idea of the merging of Havaya and Adnai and Havaya, the 2 levels again, this is a deep concept. This is a very fundamental idea of faith in God. But the fundamental idea of Yehuda Tata, even there, Hashem didn't change. Why? Even though you see people, you see existence, the fact that you see existence means Hashem's presence is here more than ever. So the first thing he wants to say in this part of the chapter we're going to start today is that when God says, I didn't change, it means even in the perspective of Yehuda Tata, because what you're seeing and everything you're perceiving as existence is only a way that you see the image on the wall as a separate identity. But in truth, if you understand how it works, you understand when the projector projects, the image has nothing and nothing changed. There's no other, if what the projector says, is there a second image in this room besides what's inside of me? The answer is no. What you see over there is me. I'm just projecting myself over there. Hashem projects himself as a water bottle. Hashem projects himself as a shofar. Hashem projects himself as a planet. But all that is just Hashem's projection of self. Ani havaya leishanisi, nothing changed. There's no other existence. So this is the first step of a very deep thing we're going to go into today. This is step 1. Based on what we said until now in the beginning and the middle of this chapter, we get an idea of what possibly the question could be. The question could be, seemingly Hashem needed other. To be a king, he needs other. So what do you mean, Ani havaya leishanisi? There is other. You have a person, you're now the king over others. No, that otherness that you see is just myself being projected. Okay, that's the first point. We go from here. Now, let's go inside page 164, and we'll take it from here. by the nakuda, by the dot, halfway down, second word on the line, page 164. Now all that we said in the above, in this chapter 7, Yuvan Masha Kosov, now we can understand what it says in the prophets, Ani Havaya Loishanisi. I am God, I never change, meaning I would have a question after reading the first part, where it says Hashem created specifically with the power of Malchus, with the power of Adonai. Hashem wanted to be a king and rule over other, therefore Hashem made other existence. So I would have said, hey, how could you say Ani Havaya Loishanisi? He said, well, now that we explain the idea of Shiluv, the idea of the Yechud Elah and Yechud Tata means even Yechud Tata, there's no separate existence. It's a projection. It's all God. Meaning, Peter she'ein shum shinui klal k'moisha hoya levad koydem brias ha'olam kachu levad achav shnivra. And that's what we're telling you. Hashem, the way He was alone in the world, the projector was alone in the room before the image was projected. He's still alone in the room. Because not only is there no image, the whole image there is just the presence of God, but even that which you see as an image is all just projection of God. In other words, the world that exists is godliness projected. And that might be one of the easiest ways that I find to relate to this idea, how there could be existence, but the existence is nothing other than God. And the metaphor used a lot of times as light, and there are other metaphors used, and this is, I think, one that helps a lot.
Yesh me'ayin.
Yesh me'ayin, but the yesh that exists is really not a yesh for itself. It's a yesh that comes from the ayin. Mm-hmm. And the ayin, that's that we say in the Rebbe's capital this year. We ask me ayin yaveh ezrei, from where will it come? Ayin. From that which is ayin, that is the source. Or you could say from Yud Aleph Nisan. Ayin is the letters Aleph Yud Nun is Yud Aleph Nisan. Okay. And this is why, if you look at the davening, before davening begins, we have a beautiful prayer describing Hashem's existence in the world, pre-creation, post-creation, and we repeat, it's almost like we say, Atahu, you are the one, Ad Shenivra, before the world was created. Atahu, you are the one, Misha Nivra, from it was created. And the question the commentaries ask, why do you have to repeat the words Atahu? Just say, Atahu, Ad Nivra, Umisha Nivra. What do you mean you are the one before and you are the one after? And the answer is, we're saying it's really you are the one, not that you are the one before and after. You, the same you that was there before, is the same you that is thereafter. It's not like there's a very similar thing. It's identical. There's a very famous sikha of the Rebbe. I say famous because it was shared many times. Where the Rebbe asks, Achashverosh, who Achashverosh? What does it mean in the Megillah we started by Hibim Achashverosh? It wasn't days of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? He is Achashverosh, who ruled over 127 lands. Just say he is Achashverosh, who ruled over 127 lands. What do you say? He is Achashverosh. Who is Achashverosh? He is. What do we mention again? And the Rebbe goes into a very similar idea here, and he goes to answer another question. The question he actually answers is, why did Mordechai stay in the palace and stay in the government after the story of Purim? Seems like it was over. It was resolved. There was a challenge. There was a Haman, and he was hung from a tree. The enemies are gone. Let him go back to Sanhedrin. Let him go back to his learning the whole day. It says that he stayed in the office too. He worked as a minister in the king's palace all the way for many more years. So the question is, and it says actually the other members of the Sanhedrin were upset about it. That's why it says at the end of the Megillah, most of his colleagues appreciated his stance. That means some didn't. Some felt, hey, the miracle's over. The story's now you can come back to full time in the yeshiva. The Rebbe says the answer is Achashverosh or Achashverosh. The same anti-Semite he was before the story, he remained the same anti-Semite afterwards. When someone doesn't change, when someone is the same, so by Hashem, lahavdil alfei avdalas, it's talking in the positive. Hashem is Hashem before and after. By Achashverosh, it means he was an anti-Semite more than Haman before the story started, like some of the Polish people that hated the Jews more than the Nazis. And unfortunately, when the opportunity came, while they would live together, they smiled. The opportunity came, they were vicious. And then after it's over, meaning the danger, the threat of Achashverosh didn't change. He's the same guy. So here it means it in the positive, in a much different way about God. Hashem didn't change, not before and not after. It's the same guy. He was alone in the world before. As we mentioned, Yichud Elon, Yichud Data. And now the Alter Rebbe has something incredible here, which we're going to go into focus the next while. He says there was no change in Hashem, not in his essence and not in his das. What does it mean, not in his das? A person sometimes in life could be unchanged, but the truth is your entire life is changed by what you know. What changes a person from one day to the next, primarily, is your experiences. Things that you saw, things that you heard, things that you discovered, things that you learned. That's the biggest change in us. The biggest change is I learned a new thing, I discovered a new thing, a behavior, a quality, ethics, morals, people who could be painful, people who could be nice, people who could be incredible, people who could be dangerous. I change based on all the information in my head. That's who I am. I am what I think, therefore I am. I think it's Descartes. I don't know who said it. But I don't know, how do you say his name? Descartes?
Descartes.
No, not
Socrates.
not Socrates. Descartes. Yeah. So basically, a person's mind is your identity. So a person is constantly changing by what you learn, and what you learn becomes you. Who are you? You're a composite of all your experiences in the last 30, 40 years of your life. That's who you are. Your identity is a composite of what happened. You're a experience, and everything you're going to do is how you're going to translate the word big and small is based on what you saw big and small in your life. So to you, big, it could be a planet, it could be the solar system, and small could be a tiny ant. Same thing, what's called strong and weak, what's called good and bad. It's all based on our experiences, because our identity becomes what we know. A person growing up in other environments sees good and bad in a different light. So what you know actually is the biggest changer of who you are, because it's the external part of you that interacts with the world, and it's your interface, how to translate what means good, what means pain. How do you know what pain is? Only God can know what pain you experienced. I have a first cousin who had a very painful tragedy in his life, and then later had a second painful tragedy. And he said, I didn't know how much our heart could hurt. I thought I reached the maximum. Now I know it could hurt even more. And he said, based on this, my heart could hurt this much. Heart could love. He said, I want to find the same way I found the deepest pain. I want to find the deepest love. And he works to find a way to show the greatest love, the most unbelievable situations. A very incredible guy in Israel, Donnie Stiskin. So the idea is that your mind is affected by all your experiences. So we say not only, and we know another thing, how do we understand Hashem from our own flesh? Understand, just like we have in our body, our mind and our feelings and emotions, the seichel and midday, chachma, bina, das, and our identity, and our soul and our body and our function. The same thing we can learn about Hashem. Hashem also has the chachma, the bina, and the das. So Hashem also has das. So we imagine that yes, maybe Hashem's essence hasn't changed, but Hashem's awareness of us, there's some little bit. Hashem has more knowledge about us. Hashem watched what we did. Hashem grows from, I want to say Hashem grows. I don't want to say that. Hashem gains details of some information in his das about all the stuff that transpire. So how do we understand that? So the Alter Rebbe says, not only Hashem doesn't change in his atzmos, he doesn't change even in his external badas. Why? Ki yedias atzmai yedeya kol nevroyim. Because Hashem's knowledge is very different. We're going to quote here, we quoted in chapter 2 from the Rambam. The Rambam explains in one of his deep philosophical works, and he also explains it in Laws of Tshuva. He explains that Hashem, in general, when it comes to knowing something, we could subdivide it into three categories. There's the person who knows. There's a person. There's my intelligence, which is the machinery or the program that knows, that machshava, my thinking, my seichel, my intelligence. That's the thing I know. For an example, let's take 2 + 2 = 4. There's me, I'm the knower. There's my intelligence that could do the calculation that 2 + 2 = 4. And then there's the fact that 2 + 2 = 4. Or let's take it at a more mundane, blunt level. There's me, my seichel, and the awareness that there's a bottle here. So let's think of those two metaphors. The 2 + 2 = 4, and that the bottle is right here. By me, there remains three separate things. There's me, there's the bottle, and there's the fact that I can think about it. Hashem, it's all one. Hu hayedeya, hu hamada, v'hu hayedua. He is the one who knows. He is the information of, meaning the processing thing, and he is the thing that is known. That means Hashem, the mind and the bottle, or Hashem, the mind and 2 + 2 = 4 is all one. You can't separate them. In other words, Hashem doesn't have information outside of himself. It's all Hashem's essence. The Rambam goes into this for an example, just appreciate it. He asks a question in Hilchos Tshuva. How could I think it's the Laws of Tshuva, or it's in his writing about Tshuva. He says, how could a person have free choice? Hashem knows the future. Hashem knows what's going to happen tomorrow. It's already predetermined. What do you mean I have free choice? Hashem knows tomorrow if I'm going to eat and make a bracha or not, if I'm going to bench or not. I don't have free choice. It's already been determined by Hashem's knowledge. And of course, there are many answers given. The Rambam says the best answer, he says, don't try and understand it, because Hashem's knowledge doesn't work like our knowledge. If you're trying to understand it, it's like trying to understand or discuss 2 plus 2 equals 4 with a piece of wood. When you come to human beings, you could say, I am much smarter than a piece of wood. Why? Because I'm a created being, and the piece of wood's a created being. Nevertheless, the statement is very silly. If I want to say this math problem is so complicated, I can't even explain it to a chair. A chair will never understand it. Or it's so complicated, I can't even hold it in my hand. It's too heavy. It makes no sense. Why? Because me and the idea are so distant. The chair and the idea, the wood and the idea are so distant, they can't even be qualified in the same tools. And we're just two created beings. Hashem's knowledge is infinitely more advanced, and therefore, to say we can't understand God's knowledge, that itself is an insult. It's like saying the chair can't understand what I'm saying. You're so smart, the chair doesn't understand what you're saying. That's an insult. To say a human being can't grasp God, we cannot grasp God's mind. We will never have an understanding or know what God's mind is like. But one thing's for sure, it doesn't affect the future. And the Rambam brings that out in the laws of Tshuva, and you should know you do have free choice. Don't think it was determined, because Hashem's knowledge doesn't work like our knowledge. Don't try to understand it. Even though Chassidus does explain, one of the easiest metaphors that we give for it is just like my knowledge of the past doesn't change. I know, for an example, that a student came to class chewing gum yesterday. My knowledge of the fact doesn't change whether he chewed gum or not, because it's the past, so I know about it. Hashem's knowledge of the future doesn't change it either. How? That's because Hashem's knowledge works differently. But the bottom line is that the system that Hashem uses is completely different, and therefore, Hashem's knowledge of the world is not like our knowledge. So when we have other information, this information changes us and transforms us. By Hashem, nothing in the world affects his knowledge, because that's something outside of himself. It's a different system. So this that we might think, 1 second, maybe just like we, over years of experience, become transformed at some level. Maybe not in my essence is the same, but I know stuff and I'm experiencing stuff I never experienced before. By Hashem, it's not true. Hashem's das does not work with our das. Let's see this inside. He says, "V'loi b'daitoi," not in his essence and not in his das. Ki yedias atzmoi yodea kol hanevroim. It's with his essence himself that he knows all existence. Shakol mimenu ubatlu mesias etzlai. Everything is from Hashem. Everything is part of Hashem. It's almost like, even though it's not a good example, it's almost like if I stub my toe and someone asks me, how'd you find out about that? No one told you. Who told you stub your toe? I don't have to be told. It's not something which is outside of myself. It's not information I have to gather. As it happens, I know it happens. The Rambam writes, by Hashem, there is one essence that knows. He is a thing which is known. And he is the seichel, he is the logic that makes it atzma. It's all one. This concept, he said it's not possible for a mouth to say it, meaning this idea that Hashem is all one. I could try and explain it, but my mind can't understand it, so I can't explain it. It's not possible for an ear to hear it. It's not in your heart to recognize this al-Buddha properly. So he's saying something here. Don't try and understand what this means, because it's not possible for a human being not just a human being, a created being, even a malach, even an angel, to understand what this means. That God's wisdom, mind, essence, it's all one. And he says like 4 expressions. You can't say it, you can't understand it, you can't feel it, you can't recognize it. We said before, Hashem, not in his essence and not in his knowledge. He says, you know why? Because Hashem's essence and his knowledge are one. It's not like by us we have ourselves, Moshe Rapoport, and I'm thinking. Now I'm thinking about that, now I'm thinking about this, and the thing that I'm thinking about doesn't change. I can't change the identity of 2 plus 2 equals 4. I can't change the reality of whether this cup exists or not. Hashem's knowledge and the thing are all one. There's no separate thing. Remember, everything in the projected image is all in the projector. There's no separate identity. So there's no separate thing going on outside of himself. Hakol echad, I think the Alter Rebbe continues this metaphor, which is unbelievable. Hakol echad mamish, this is Alter Rebbe's add-on to the words of the Rambam. Mamish, actually. Mikol tzadu pina, from any direction you try and approach it. However you're trying to approach it philosophically, kabbalistically, trying to approach it with a deep understanding, trying to use metaphors and examples, he says you're not going to understand this because derech yichud in any way that you try and approach it. The ein daitei dover neisef al mahusei v'atzmusei, Hashem's knowledge, Hashem's awareness is not something separate from his essence, separate from his pure essence of God. Like which is unlike a human being. By a person, your mind and your essence is different. Umurkav, and your mind and your body become merged into one. Not much different than when you merge two ingredients to make a cake. You can't say, okay, I see. Well, sometimes when I do it, if I mix it, it's not mixed well. But if you mix it well, you can't see the flour and the eggs and the oil. You just see the final product. You can't see the identity. Or if you merge through two parents, a child becomes one. You can say, yeah, you have your father's eyes. But the bottom line is, a child is 100% a mixture. That's what we says in the Chumash, that a man and woman should become one. It doesn't just mean when they're together intimately. It's much deeper. It means have a child, because in your child is the absolute oneness. The parents become one, and that child, it's both parents and one. So your body and your mind, Taka, are merged. They become one, but it's merged with one. It's two identities that merge. It's two separate things that come together. When a person learns something, you existed, your thinking self existed before you learned it. And after you learn it, your thinking self still exists. So there is two separate things that come together. It's not like by Hashem that his thinking self, so to speak, and the thing he's thinking about are one. By a human being, there's 2 + 2 = 4, and there's my intelligence. And now my intelligence learned that piece of information. I learned that how much kilograms are in pounds. That information existed before me, and I existed before that. Now we just came together as one. Now it becomes part of me. But it's all one. It's all separate entities that can merge together, but not that it's one entity on its own. This becomes part of you. I'm just going to finish these 2 more lines. And the same thing is true every single day when you experience life and you go through all the things that it inspire. And all the experience that you have, they add to your wisdom, add to your identity. They say, they don't teach you like experience. Experience changes you. It makes you react differently to experiences. People who have experienced, God forbid, an accident, suddenly the whole appreciation of a seatbelt changes. Somebody who appreciated, any experience in life, your whole approach changes. You change. But it's 2 separate things. There's the thing that happened. There's the experience, there's knowledge, and there's you. It's just that they become merged, and it actually changes you, which is not so by Hashem. This is not a oneness in its essence, it's a merge. There merges 2 things. There's ingredients in the cake. There actually is eggs, there actually is oil, there actually is flour, except that it all merge and become one. By Hashem, you can't, God forbid, say that there's eggs and oil and flour that becomes one. Hashem's Achdus Pshuta. And by Hashem, there is no separate merging of anything. Hashem is a pure essence of one, and therefore his knowledge and the thing he knows and Hashem is one, and therefore, just like his essence isn't changed by creation, so too he isn't changed by creation. We'll stop here because it's already 1:45, but we'll go from here to continue next week, God willing, to explain the rest of this part of the chapter. But this is a very core idea in understanding Hashem, is what's based on this idea of Shiluv. The idea of the Yichud Ilah means that everything is really Havaya. There is everything unlimited, no time, no space. And this that we see time and space, it's not the time and space that you think it is. And the other way is that there is time, there is space, there is world, but it's all purely a projection of godliness. So a world does exist, but not for identity for itself. And like I said, no difference than the water bottle and the subatomic particles. We'll stop here and wish everyone a healthy and happy, sweet New Year.